Danny, welcome.
Thank you.
Excited to talk to you today. Okay, so take me back to Friday, March 13th of 2020, when the world and your restaurants kind of shut down in response to this global virus that nobody really had any idea about. What do you remember from that day?
So for me, there wasn't really one day that comes to mind. It was truly something that started probably about midway through February, because I had, as luck would not have it, two different trips planned, international trips for the month of March. One was going to be to Shanghai for the opening of a brand new Shake Shack there, the first one in the city. And the other one was to Rome. And I was incredibly aware of what was happening in China. And as you know, Italy was pretty much the first Western country to just get walloped. And so I canceled both of the trips.
When were they scheduled for?
That one was scheduled for the first week in March, and one was scheduled for the second week in March. I mean, it was going to be a brutal month of travel because I would have come back to New York in between. But I was really, I think I was aware before others, many others in my industry in New York City, certainly, as to what may be coming our way. And then actually, a lot of folks from the Shake Shack team were in China in mid-February. And I was blown away when they sent pictures of themselves in hazmat suits in order to leave China to go to Japan, where they were about to go next. So it was very clear that this was not your average kind of virus. I mean, we had seen SARS through the years. Certainly we had read about Ebola, but there was something very, very different about this. So at any rate, the next thing that happened was in the very first week of March. We were hosting an annual breakfast at the Modern for the Rudin Transportation Center. And a lot of public officials come to it. It's a great breakfast. It kind of kicks off, the precipice of spring, even though spring doesn't tend to get to New York till May. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that we had for the breakfast, it was on a Thursday, the first week in March. And I was stuck in the city because I couldn't do those two trips I was supposed to take. And by Monday, that's the Monday right thereafter, we started reading reports that one of the attendees at that breakfast had been tested positive for the coronavirus.
Wow.
And COVID-19. We didn't know what any of those terms, I mean, we had read about them, but I hadn't heard of anybody, and we freaked out. We were like, I guess we're all going to get it. And we equated getting it with dying.
Because at the time, testing wasn't really, nobody was really testing. It wasn't a thing.
No, as a matter of fact, at that breakfast, there were huge, like Costco size bottles of Purell that we put all over the restaurant. And everybody was like, are you kidding me? And some people were shaking hands and some people weren't shaking.
Right.
There was already an awareness this was a real thing. But what was very, very weird was that on that Monday, when the news came out that one of the attendees at our event had been tested positive for COVID, we freaked out. And we had conversations with the Museum of Modern Art, which is where our restaurant is. We agreed that what we were going to do was to close the restaurant, completely get a professional company to scrub it out, get everyone on our staff tested. And at that point, the tests were like $160 a piece. Scrub every visitor cafe within the museum, even though the kitchens were completely remote from the Modern, and just close the restaurant for like 3 or 4 days. The next thing, and that was a big deal. That was a really big deal. That was on a Monday.
Yeah.
So that very Monday night, I was planning to bring a friend to the Modern for dinner. And I said, we can't go there. Let's go to Union Square Cafe. And this was also so early that it was a tough thing to explain to the public why you were closing, because you didn't want to freak people out. So that same Monday night, I took that friend to Union Square Cafe because we couldn't eat at the Modern. And we had a great dinner. And the next morning, I learned that we had sent home one of our cooks who had worked the shift that I was having dinner at.
Wow.
And had complained about having flu-like symptoms. And so we sent him, and had a big fever and all this kind of stuff. And we closed the restaurant the next day because it was going to take at least 2 days to get him a test and another 2 days to get the results. So now we closed Union Square Cafe for 4 days, but it gets better because Union Square Cafe shares a kitchen with Daily Provisions. So we closed Daily Provisions as well. 4 days goes by, we get the test back, and he was negative for COVID.
Yeah. No.
So we had gone through all of this, but it just shows the level of fear that we were feeling, because of having, felt and seen and read about what was happening in China and in Italy at that point, and B, that one thing at the Modern. And each time this happened, you're putting a sign up on your restaurant, and it's almost like having a scarlet letter. And so now we are about March the 8th or 9th or 10th or something like that. And I said to our team, I said, this is inevitable. Maybe we can stay open for a few more shifts, but probably the better thing to do, as opposed to episodically closing, we need to put our team in a safe place.
Yeah.
That's thing one. And we can't be in a position where our team is not safe, and we certainly cannot be in a position where the people who are entrusting us with their safety as our guests are not safe. Right. And so we decided very, very early on to shut all of our restaurants. I believe the date was, I think the last meals we served anywhere was the 12th of March, which was about a week for New York City.
Yeah, March 20th, is when New York shut down.
Yeah, and I started speaking with restaurant colleagues, not only across the country, Seattle, which had been early on, but I spoke to restaurant colleagues in London, which also had experienced it before New York. I also spoke with people I knew in the Middle East through Shake Shack. We have licensed partners in Hong Kong and in Singapore and in South Korea. And what I thought I learned, I thought I was really smart, was that this was going to last 9 weeks, because opened their restaurants, London reopened their restaurants exactly 9 weeks from the first reported case.
Interesting.
Coronavirus. So we did the math, and we asked ourselves, what will happen to our company if we have 9 weeks with no revenue? And that's a really serious thing, because restaurants truly, we have thin margins, and we depend upon the cash flow that comes in. And we then calculated how many people we would have to either furlough or lay off to get through 9 weeks without going out of business. Right. And all the advice I got was cut once and cut deeply, because the worst thing you can do for morale is to do a little bit and then a little more, because everybody comes to work fearing that they're going to be next. And it's just a horrible, horrible way to do business. And so it was the most excruciating, probably 3 days of my career, working with our senior leaders and trying to figure out, what do we do here? We've spent 35 years building a great organization, a great culture, people first culture. How do we reconcile that with laying people off. We've just never, I think in 3, probably laid off 5 people due to, I'm not talking about terminating people who shouldn't have been on our team. I'm talking about,
layoffs.
economically driven. And now all of a sudden we were looking at going from 2,400 employees down to 175.
Wow. So you laid off over 2,000 people.
Over 2,000 people. And,
wow.
And then the question became, how do you do that in a way that if you have to make that decision, is there a humane way to do it? Is there can you distinguish yourself by handling that awful situation better and not worse? And so then we started thinking about a whole lot of other, okay, what do we do?
So it was interesting. It was interesting because over the last 18 months, obviously, there have been tons of monetary and fiscal policy decisions made by the government that entrepreneurs have had to navigate across industry. One of the things that the restaurant industry had to evaluate was the PPP loan. And you're in the unique position where I believe Shake Shack took a PPP loan and then you gave it back. Can you explain kind of like the guidance from the government you got early on and how you made that decision and then made the decision to actually give it back?
Sure. I mean, the PPP loans, which stood for Payroll Protection Program, I think,
right,
was part of a larger bill called the CARES Act, which also included extended unemployment insurance. And this was the other side of it, which was we're not only going to give extended unemployment insurance to people who have been laid off, but we're also going to provide an incentive for businesses to hire people back by making a loan that would be forgivable if you do hire people back within, I believe it was 8 to 12 weeks of getting the loan.
Yep.
And they created the government. Well, one of the breathtaking things was it was the only time, I think, in the last many years that both parties in both houses of the Senate, or of Congress rather, made a decision collaboratively and quickly. And so that was a good thing. It was a very swiftly put together plan. The government laid out what the qualifications were. They entrusted banks to be the agents of providing these loans based on applicability, et cetera. And Shake Shack clearly qualified. Would never have been approved for one of these loans. And unfortunately, the very, very day that Shake Shack announced its loan as a public company, of course, it was going to disclose that it had received a loan, which was $10 million for the company, was the exact same day. And that was natural course of business. And by the way, Shake Shack's business had dropped, to the nadir at that point. And Shake Shack was faced with laying people off all over the country. So seemed like this is a program that Shake Shack qualifies for. It seemed like a wise thing to apply for it. But the very day that Shake Shack disclosed that it had received a loan was the exact same day that the Treasury Department announced that they had run out of money for the program. And so the narrative is that the big guys had elbowed out the little guys, and there they do that, which of course was not anyone's intent when you apply for something that you qualify for.
Right.
No one ever said, and by the way, if yours is approved, someone much smaller will not get theirs. And that was the whole thing. And we felt it, we saw it. it was truly a tsunami of really bad feeling out there. So this was all on I think it was a Friday morning, and we met weekend as a board, and I shouldn't say all weekend. I met with the CEO of Shake Shack. I'm the chairman of the board.
Yep.
On a Saturday, and the two of us agreed very quickly, just give it back. It's like life is too short, and it should, if the government is going to have run out of money, it should go to a smaller business. So we were the first public company to make that decision. We met with our board on that Sunday night. Randy Garuti, who's the CEO, and I co-wrote a note or a letter on which we posted on LinkedIn to explain what we were doing and why. And that then led actually to quite a few other companies making that same decision. In fact, it even to some educational, like Harvard followed suit. They applied for a PPP loan. Sad news was that we unwittingly became the poster children for everything that was wrong with PPP after that. And, PPP became almost symbolic of greed, which it is, matter of fact, to the contrary. We also applied for PPP loans for our full service restaurants, much smaller than what Shake Shack got, but we're on the hook for those, and we're on the hook. Those are loans. Those were not grants. We're on the hook to pay. And the reason is that the program was a complete failure for the full service restaurant industry, especially in cities like New York, where you were prohibited from reopening within the 8 to 12 weeks. And therefore the loans were non-forgivable. So we couldn't hire people back because we couldn't open. So it was a pretty bad deal. And then the next deal, which could have been great, is called the Restaurant Replenishment Act. And that had some really good things and some really bad things, but that came about earlier this year. And what that was not a loan, but a grant to independent restaurants. They kept chains out of it, which was a wise thing to do. They were really clear about that. And the goal there was to make a grant to independent restaurants that would be in the amount of the difference between your 2019 revenues and your 2020 revenues.
Interesting.
So that you would be whole in terms of your revenue, and therefore be in a position to pay back the debts that you owed either to landlords who continue to charge rent throughout this whole thing, or to your suppliers, to whom a lot of money was owed as well, and put you in a position to get back up on your feet. Great thing, except for two problems. After 1/3 of the grant applicants had gotten 100% of their qualifying grants, the government ran out of money. That left 2/3 of the restaurants with zero money. So the two problems with this program were that 2/3 of the restaurants, including all of our full service restaurants, got nothing. What they should, if they had calculated appropriately, they should have given everybody 1/3 of the amount, as opposed to 1/3, 100%, and 2/3, 0%. But the other problem is that restaurants that remained open, trying to do the right thing for their community, trying to hire people back, trying to buy more products from their suppliers in 2020, actually got lower grant amounts, because the delta was smaller between 2019 and 2020 than those restaurants who just said, we're closing. So if you closed your restaurant in 2020 and didn't even try, you got a bigger grant. And now we compound the labor shortage that exists all over the country right now, because the restaurants that got the grants can actually pay an extra 50 cents an hour, an extra $1 an hour. And now you see a siphoning of talent from the 2/3 that didn't get the grants. And And so now Congress has another opportunity, which Lord knows they can't even get, infrastructure done. I don't know how they're going to do this, but there is a bipartisan bill called the Restaurant Replenishment Fund to make up for the 2/3 of the restaurants that didn't get anything. So anyway, it's been a lot of learning. We learned what the federal government could and couldn't do. We learned what state government could and couldn't do, and we learned what city government could and couldn't do. All very different things. It's been a good civics lesson.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have hindsight bias and now it's obvious what should have been done, but there was so little information in the beginning that nobody knew, oh, I'll get a loan, but then New York won't allow me to open my restaurant. Therefore, I cannot use the loan. It's crazy. What I find interesting is that your restaurants have actually weathered multiple crises in the last few decades, including 9/11, the financial crisis of 2008. Did you, when coronavirus happened, did you try to apply some of the lessons that you learned in those crises that didn't actually work this time around?
The one thing that did not work this time around was we couldn't use our restaurants themselves as part of the healing process. So, for example, 9/11, when New Yorkers were afraid that something bad was going to happen again, going to a restaurant with people people you love, was actually part of the healing. And hospitality, which the root of which is the word hope, is the antithesis for fear. And so we actually could play a very active role in bringing the economy back. It was a patriotic act, in fact, to go out and eat. We were not going to let that act of terror ruin our economy and ruin our emotional fabric. But this time around, we didn't have that tool because going out to eat was an act of
it was
danger.
Dangerous. Yeah.
And soon illegal anyway. So that was taken away. I think we did still find ways as an industry to step up. In our case, we created a 501c3 called the Hugs Fund, which is a handy anagram for USHG. And we succeeded at working with our regular guests through selling gift cards where we gave 100% of the proceeds to the Hugs Fund. We held 2 online auctions and we raised $2 million, which we then were able to grant out to the qualifying staff members who had been laid off in increments of $2,500, which was really helpful to a lot of people. And so you can still be hospitable. We also worked with a fantastic organization called Rethink Food. And through getting some sponsorship from one of our landlords, Brookfield Properties, and working with Rethink Food, we were able to activate 3 of our restaurants, hire cooks, buy product, make meals that Rethink would then deliver to 2 different organizations in the Bronx. So, and then we were able to partner with 2 different restaurants in the Bronx and mentor them in terms of some of the ways we were trying to get back up on our feet. So it was a fantastic program. It allowed us to hire. It made only a small dent in the many people we laid off, but I think we were able to hire probably 35 or 40 people who otherwise wouldn't have. We also found some partner restaurants around the country that were able to open, and they were all too eager to hire some of our cooks to work in their places for the summer of 2020, especially in hotels and that happened to be open during the summer of 2020 in different parts of the country. So we just did every single thing we could. But the biggest lesson that I think is consistent with, the first crisis I ever experienced as a restaurateur was just 2 years after opening Union Square Cafe, and called Black Friday. It was in 1987, and the bottom fell out of the stock market. And I I'd never seen anything like that. I was quite sure that my career was ending just about as quickly.
And you were 29 years old at the time, something like that.
That's right. And completely inexperienced. And yeah, it was a really bad 3 weeks. And I learned what the impact of Wall Street was on our business. Of course, we had the Gulf War of 1991, which led to pretty good recession back home, curtailed some tourism here in the city. And I learned the value of tourism to our city. And of course, 9/11, I'm sure there were other things. We had Hurricane Sandy, closed us for an entire week. But I think the through line to every single one of those is a question that I always ask now, because we've weathered every one of them. They're not fun. But the question I always ask is this the thing that is going to end the world? And if the answer is no, then obviously life is going to go on at some point. You don't know when. And one of the really, really frustrating and hard parts of COVID has been that the goalposts keep getting moved. So what I didn't share earlier is that when we cut our team all the way down to 145, that was with the false hope that this was going to be a 9-week ordeal. And when it wasn't, we cut 175 down to 100. And then we cut that down to 45. We never got below 45. Now we're back up around 1,600. So we're building back to where we want to be. But even last year, we had reopened most of our restaurant, not all, but most of our restaurants, outdoor dining. And then we were able, as of September of 2020, to open at 25% capacity indoors. And then all of a sudden in November, we had to shut everything down again. And once again, we closed our restaurants a full week before the rest of the city did, because we could see what was coming. And I just not want our team members to get sick or our guests to get sick. So it's if you know it's going to be done, then if you know this is not the thing that's going to end the world, even if you don't know when it's going to end, you still have to ask yourself, all right, so while this thing is happening, who will we have been? How will we have behaved? What kind of choices will we have made? Because everyone on our team is going to look back on that and say, I'm either proud to have been affiliated with that kind of business or I'm not. Our guests say that. Our community is going to say that. And so that has been our guiding compass throughout the whole thing, is who will we have been while it was happening? And furthermore, who will we be when it's over? And where will we be? And, the only way we could reconcile laying all these people off as a business that tries to put people first is to say, well, if the alternative is that we will be out of business, which will make us the employer ever, then we've got to make some really tough decisions to keep us in business, but we can still do it in a better way.
So I find this really interesting, and you kind of touched on it, but with every restaurant that you've opened, kind of like based on everything that I've read, it's been a success because largely your priority is not ever just the food or just the menu or just the decor. It's how the dining experience makes the customer feel. And you've said before that there are 3 things that you can scale as an entrepreneur: product, service, and feeling. It's the feeling that's the trickiest. Can you explain practically how an entrepreneur can scale that feeling that you talk about?
Yeah. I think, as is the case with every culture on earth, whether it's a business or a family or a religion or a sorority or a club, language is the building block of that culture. And I mean, even in your family, everybody has a shorthand way of speaking that you all get. People have nicknames that are just your family's nicknames. In business, I think you can be very intentional about your culture through language. And you don't have to work to have a culture, but you do have to work to have an intentional and uplifting culture. And I think if the first thing about the word feeling is, well, what do you want it to feel like? And we're really clear, whatever you were feeling when you came to work, we know you're going to probably be more tired when you leave, but that doesn't mean you can't feel emotionally uplifted. However you felt when you came to dine at one of our restaurants, maybe you had a bad taxi ride or a bad subway ride or bad day at work. I can't do anything about that, but we can sprinkle a little magic dust, and after 2 hours, we want you to leave feeling even better. And through language and through intention and through hiring people with the intention of hiring people who have what we call a high HQ, high hospitality.
Yeah, can you explain what HQ is?
Sure. Hospitality quotient is a predictor as to the degree to which any human being feels better themselves when they make someone else feel better. It's not in and of itself a good thing, but if you're putting together a team, I think if you can hire people who have the 6 emotional skills that we always see at a very high level in people with a high HQ, in addition to being a great pasta cook, what if you also are primarily motivated by wanting your pasta to make someone else feel better? I got an advantage over the restaurant that has a good pasta cook who doesn't make people feel better and doesn't care about making people feel better. And you really have to be very, very resolute and clear about that up and down the organization, not just waiters, waitresses, but everyone in the restaurant is hired for their emotional skills 51% and for their technical skills 49%.
Interesting. What are those 6 emotional skills that you talk about? And do you think that those can be taught?
I'll answer the second part first. I think that most of those emotional skills were learned before you came to us. But I think what any business can do is to celebrate those emotional skills. And I think most businesses don't. I think most businesses celebrate the things they can measure really easily, like in our business, food cost percentage, labor cost percentage, occupancy cost percentage. That's simple. Anybody can do that. It's really hard to measure the 6 emotional skills, which are kindness and optimism, curious intelligence, empathy, work ethic, self-awareness, and integrity. It's hard to measure those things, and so most businesses don't. But that's not to say that you cannot promote people and review people and make 51% of their review based on where they are on those emotional skills and focus on them and let people know when they're hired, as they're working, this is what we celebrate and prize in this business. And I think you get what you celebrate, and you also get what you put up with. And I think, one of the best things you can do for a culture sometimes is to prune the tree of the branches that are sick, because otherwise you're sending an equally powerful message to your team that we're tolerating these behaviors, even though we're celebrating these. That sends a really awful mixed message to people.
That's interesting.
So one other way I look at this is the metaphor of the sunflower, which is that the sunflowers always turn to where the sun is. We too often, as business people, shine a light, meaning we give attention to the problems, and we don't shine our light on the people who are doing the best job. We take them for granted, and that's not a good thing to do. And so those flowers will go wherever the sun is. And I'm a big believer that it's a little bit of a bell curve thing. There's very, very few people who have no hospitality quotient. They're just like miserable. Nothing. They don't care about making anyone else happy. They're just going about their life. There's very few people who are just nothing. And there's also very few people who you could lock in a closet for 2 years and they walk out smiling, like Mary Sunshine. Most people are somewhere in the middle. And so to your earlier question, I can't teach you to be kind if you're not already kind. I can't teach you to be optimistic if you're a natural pessimist, skeptic. I can't probably teach you to have a great work ethic if you're just naturally lazy. But since most people aren't totally lazy or aren't totally, pessimistic, they'll go where the light is shining. And so if you shine light on the one that you took for granted, all the flowers that were kind of going that way start to come this way. And I think you can really culture by doing that.
That's really interesting. And the other thing that really resonated with the readers of the profile and also me is you said something that I thought was interesting. You said, make new mistakes every day. Don't waste time repeating the old ones. But as I thought about it more, you work in an industry where consistency and a certain level of perfectionism is expected. So how do you encourage your team to still experiment and take risks without the fear of failure?
Well, by doing exactly what I said at the beginning, which is that as long as your mistake doesn't lack integrity, make it.
So as long as there's good intent.
As long as there's good intent, you probably took a risk for the purpose of making someone else feel better. And if it didn't work, it's okay. It's just okay. It's just, if you have a culture of fear where people are afraid of getting in trouble because they made a mistake, an honest mistake, you're going to have a much, much lower rate of innovation. You're going to have a much lower rate of going outside your comfort zone to do extraordinary things for people. Mm-hmm. I think hospitality in any business, not just the restaurant business, is truly about customizing experiences for people. And that means that if everything is off the rack, if everything you do is just, that's how we do it, I'm going to do it that same way every single time, and I'm not going to get in trouble, and it's going to be safe, you'll be fine. But fine no longer wins the race. Exceptional and remarkable wins the race. And the only thing that I think gets you to the exceptional and remarkable stage is when you did exceptional and remarkable things for people over and beyond what they expected.
Right.
And that is going to involve mistake making. And key thing is learn from the mistake, teach from the mistake. And generally, you can end up in a better place with the person you made the mistake on if you practice what we call the 5 A's of mistake making. And the first thing is be aware you made the mistake. If you're not aware, you're nowhere. You wouldn't believe how many mistakes I've made, and I didn't even know I made them. and someone's harboring this feeling for a long time. So first, be aware. Second, acknowledge it. Mm-hmm. Third, apologize for it. Fourth, act on it, fix it. And fifth, apply additional generosity. So where I acknowledge I did it, I apologize, I fix it. And then I put myself in your shoes and I say, if someone made that mistake on me, what would I want them to do? And then go even further, because now it's time for us to write a great next chapter. If I make a mistake, you're going to probably tell someone about it. Mm-hmm. I can't erase that I made. If I overcook your steak or I spill all over your jacket, which we've done in our restaurants, if I lose your umbrella, whatever the thing is, someone says, well, how was your dinner at Danny Meyer's restaurant? It was okay, but they spilled all over my jacket. You're gonna tell that story. Our job is to write a great next chapter so that when you do tell that story, you have to say, but do you want to know how they handled it? And you have to tell them, and where the rest of the world is either not aware they made a mistake or denying it or running the other way or blaming it on someone else, we're embracing it, overcoming it, and using it actually as part of how we get you to feel even better about us.
I like that because not only does it apply in hospitality, like at the restaurant, how you treat the guests, but it also applies in business, where earlier when we talked about you took a PPP loan because it was good intent, but then when you saw how everything shifted, oh, maybe this is a mistake, let's handle it differently and give it back. I think it's interesting that you have an investment arm called Enlightened Hospitality Investment. What types of businesses do you like to invest in? And is there an area in hospitality where you'd like to see more innovation happening?
We started EHI as a way to acknowledge two things. Number one is we really believe that irrespective of what that business calls its culture, we happen to call it enlightened hospitality. But we believe that any business that is doing something really innovative and that has created a culture in which it prioritizes its stakeholders, first its employees, and second its customers, third the community in which it does business, fourth its suppliers, and fifth its investors, is actually standing a much better chance of creating a flywheel that has better outcomes for everybody. And we believe in that so much. And we also, secondly, believe that we don't have enough hours in the day or brains to come up with all the great ideas out there. So wouldn't it be amazing if we could raise a fund to provide growth equity to businesses that have done those two things, that come up with an idea we only wish we had come up with, and a way of doing it that is very consistent with what we call enlightened hospitality. And so irrespective of their industry. So in our first fund for EHI, we've made about 13 or 14 investments. A couple of them have had nothing to do with food, but are companies with that stakeholder culture. Many of them do have some connection to food and or to tech that connects to food. And it's going really well. We're on the precipice of completing a second fund. Obviously, we've made no investments from that fund yet. And then we also, during COVID, it's kind of interesting. If you can't be in your own business, the restaurant business, we didn't want to just sit on our hands and do nothing. We actually launched a SPAC, which I would much prefer to call an HPAC, higher purpose acquisition company. We called it Hugs, and with the exact same goal, but rather than investing a small minority amount as equity for a company, this would have the purpose of finding one business that did business in this way, which we call enlightened hospitality, and helping that business become a public company. So we're in
Have you chosen? Oh, okay. Sorry, you're in the midst of finding one?
Yeah, we're in the midst of that right this minute.
Amazing. Do you know what type of business you're looking for?
Same thing. So for example, the exact same approach we've taken with EHI, except the EHI companies are earlier stage and they're not quite ready to be a public company, but we're looking across many, many different business sectors. But in each case, the gating issue is it a company that, or a platform that we would be really proud of, whose culture is one and whose leadership are the kind of people that we would have been, honored to have surrounded ourselves with.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I just want to ask you this question because you talk a lot about the importance of the relationship with the customer. You're obviously really busy. You just opened a new restaurant. How have you managed to spend time with family, with your kids, while also being wildly ambitious in your professional life?
I would say I'm wildly curious. The ambition happens, or the outcomes happen as a result of the inputs. And the inputs for me are, I have a partner whose name is RC, and we've worked together probably for 25 years or so. And he describes me as someone who's got a rare case of OCD and ADD, which is I can't keep all the things I'm obsessing about at any moment. But it truly comes from curiosity and a desire to learn new things. I have an amazing team. I think it's a mistake to think that I do probably more than 5% of the stuff in this company. I get to pick the films we're going to make. I get to pick who's going to be the screenwriter, director, lead actor, who's going to design the set. Obviously, I'm talking about restaurants. I'm making an analogy, but I don't want to give up ever having the artistic opportunity to create new places because it's a lot of fun. I learned through the Shake Shack experience that you can also be creative, growing and building a company, and you can be generous and give it away. So Shake Shack's a company. I'm the chairman of the board, but I don't run it. We have a fantastic leadership team run by Randy Garuti. And so I like doing things. I like keeping busy, and I like trying to do different things always. And this, whether you're talking about investing or operating, always with the same lens, which is, can you do something that added something fresh to the dialogue on whatever that topic is? And can you do it in a way that makes people feel better than if the thing had never existed? And I think the ultimate goal of anything we do is a word I call essentiality, which is to create something that mattered, that changed people's lives, that made people's lives better, whether they worked there or dined there or whether it landed in their community, and the kind of business that if it went out of business, you would actually miss. I think that's what we try to do.
And how do you make sure that you have high quality relationships in your personal life as well?
By being present. And, there are a lot of stations on my radio dial. And, I'm very, very aware that if I'm tuned in, I'm tuned in. And I'm also aware that if I'm flipping back and forth too much, I'm going to have static. And my kids don't want that. My wife doesn't want that. My business doesn't want that. But I think the biggest lesson I learned from somebody many, many years ago is that it's folly to think that life balance is about work and your home life, because there's always going to be one that's coming up short. It's like a seesaw. There's no way people are always going to, on a seesaw, be at the exact same level. It's going to go like this. And so what this person helped me to see was that the true balance is are you in balance with how you're taking care of your mind, your body, your heart, and your spirit? And when I'm out of balance, it has nothing to do with where I am. I can get those various needs met at home and at work, but it has to do with, did I feed those four things in a balanced kind of way?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so that's been really helpful.
Okay. And my final question is, obviously you just opened a new restaurant and you're busy with that, but I'm curious, what does your next chapter look like? Are we going to see a next act?
Absolutely. I just don't know what it is. No, my license to grow, which I need to do, is to constantly surround myself with other people who want to grow. And my license to give up things that I used to do is to find someone who can do any one of those things better than I can. And each time I'm successful at that, I get to take on something new to me, and I get that wonderful feeling of incompetence, which I've learned to love, because if I'm feeling incompetent at something, it means it's new to me, and now I get to learn something new. So we'll see what that is.
Awesome. Well, you let me know, and then we'll do this again. Thank you so much, Danny. That was great.
Thank you, and I enjoyed this.